the airplane's engines roared. A guttural scream that drowned out the whispers of judgment rippling through the cabin. Elliot Harper clutched the armrest, his knuckles white, his heart hammering as a flight attendant's cold stare pinned him to the last row. He wasn't just a passenger, was a spectacle. A 25-year-old artist branded by a single word: gay. Elliot had boarded the flight from Chicago to Willow Creek, a small town in rural Ohio, expecting a quiet trip to visit his estranged father. Instead, he found himself escorted to the back of the plane. His carry-on yanked from his hands after a passenger, a middle-aged woman with a pinched face, complained about that kind of behavior when he'd held hands with Marcus, his boyfriend, in the terminal. Marcus, ever the optimist, had laughed it off, but Elliot felt the sting of every glance, every whisper. Now, seated in 32B, the last row, he was a pariah, the plane's outcast. The cabin lights dimmed, and Elliot's gaze drifted to Marcus, who sat beside him, his warm brown eyes glinting with defiance. Marcus Jackson, 27, was everything Elliot wasn't: bold, unapologetic, a community organizer who wore his identity like a badge of honor. They'd met 2 years ago at a Chicago art gallery, where Elliot's paintings, vivid, raw depictions of love and loss, had caught Marcus's eye. Their connection was instant, a spark that grew into a flame, but it came at a cost. In a world quick to judge, their love was a rebellion, and every public touch was a risk. "Don't let them get to you," Marcus whispered, his hand brushing Elliot's. "We're here, together. That's what matters." His voice was steady, but Elliot could hear the undercurrent of anger, the same fury that had flared when the flight attendant had separated them from the rest of the passengers. Elliot forced a smile, but his mind churned. He'd grown up in Willow Creek, a place where conformity was king, and being different was a sin. His father, Tom Harper, a retired mechanic with a temper as hard as steel, had never accepted Elliot's truth. When Elliot came out at 17, Tom's response was a slammed door and years of silence. Now, Tom was sick, lung cancer, the doctors said, and Elliot was returning, not out of love, but duty. Marcus had insisted on coming, refusing to let Elliot face the ghosts of his past alone. The plane hit turbulence, jolting Elliot back to the present. A man in a suit 2 rows ahead turned, his eyes narrowing as they landed on the couple. "Disgusting," he muttered, loud enough for Elliot to hear. Marcus stiffened, but Elliot squeezed his hand, urging him to stay calm. They couldn't afford a scene, not here, not now. As the flight continued, Elliot's thoughts drifted to Willow Creek. The town was a patchwork of cornfields and clapboard houses, where church bells rang louder than progress. He could already imagine the stares they'd get at the local diner, the whispers at the gas station. But Marcus had a plan. He always did. "We'll show them," he'd said before they left Chicago. "We'll show them love is stronger than hate." The plane's intercom crackled, and the captain's voice announced their descent into Columbus, the closest airport to Willow Creek. Elliot's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a homecoming, it was a reckoning. He glanced at Marcus, whose fingers were now laced tightly with his, a silent promise that they'd face whatever came next together. In Willow Creek, the air was thick with the scent of rain and regret. The taxi from the airport dropped them at a modest motel on the edge of town, its neon sign flickering like a dying star. Elliot's childhood home was a 20-minute drive away, but he wasn't ready to face it yet. Not tonight. The motel room was small, with faded wallpaper and a lumpy bed, but Marcus made it feel like a sanctuary. He pulled Elliot into a hug, his arms a shield against the world. "You okay?" Marcus asked, his voice soft but searching. Elliot nodded, though his chest felt tight. I don't know how to do this. Dad's never going to change. And this town, it's like walking into a lion's den." Marcus tilted Elliot's chin up, forcing their eyes to meet. "Then we'll be lions too. We're not here to hide. We're here to be us." The next morning, they drove to Tom's house, a weathered ranch-style home on a quiet street. The lawn was overgrown, the paint peeling a far cry from the pristine yard of Elliot's childhood. Tom answered the door, his frame gaunt, his eyes sunken but still sharp with the same old fire. He didn't hug Elliot, didn't even shake Marcus's hand. "You're here," was all he said, his voice gruff, before turning back inside. The living room smelled of stale coffee and medicine. Tom sat in a recliner, a blanket draped over his lap, while Elliot and Marcus took the couch. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the tick of a wall clock. Finally, Tom spoke. "Didn't expect you to bring company." "Marcus is my partner," Elliot said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "He's family." Tom's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he changed the subject, talking about his treatment, his doctors, anything but the truth hanging between them. Marcus stayed quiet, his presence a quiet strength, but Elliot could feel the weight of his father's disapproval. It was the same weight he'd carried his whole life. That afternoon, they ventured into town, hoping to clear their heads. Willow Creek's Main Street was a time capsule hardware stores, a diner, a church with a steeple that pierced the sky. At the diner, they ordered coffee, ignoring the stares from locals. A group of men in flannel shirts sat at the counter, their conversation halting when Elliot and Marcus walked in. One of them, a burly guy with a beard, muttered something about city boys and sin. Marcus's hand found Elliot's under the table, a lifeline. As they left the diner, a teenager on a bike rode by, shouting a slur that hit Elliot like a punch. Marcus started to stand, but Elliot pulled him back. "It's not worth it," he said, his voice low. But inside, he was crumbling. This was why he'd left Willow Creek. This was why he'd stayed away. That night, back at the motel, Elliot broke down. "I can't do this," he sobbed, his face buried in Marcus's chest. "They hate us. They'll always hate us." Marcus held him, his voice fierce. "They don't get to define us. We're here to show them something different. Something real." The next day, they returned to Tom's house, determined to try again. But the tension was thicker than ever. Tom's words were clipped, his patience thin. When Elliot mentioned their life in Chicago, their apartment, their friends, their love, Tom cut him off. "I don't want to hear about it," he snapped. "You're here for me, not to flaunt, whatever this is." Elliot's heart sank, but Marcus didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Mr. Harper," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we're not flaunting anything. We're living. And Elliot's your son. He deserves your love, not your judgment." The room fell silent. Tom's face reddened, But he didn't argue. For the first time, Elliot saw a flicker of something in his father's eyes: guilt. Maybe. Or shame. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The days in Willow Creek blurred into a haze of tension and small victories. Elliot and Marcus settled into a routine, splitting their time between Tom's house and the motel, navigating the town's undercurrent of hostility with cautious hope. Each morning, they braced for the stares, the whispers, the occasional venom spat from passing cars. But Marcus refused to let the hate win. "We're planting seeds," he told Elliot one evening as they walked through a park, the sunset painting the sky in hues of fire. "Even if they don't see it now, they'll remember us." Elliot wasn't so sure. Willow Creek felt like a fortress of closed minds, its walls built on tradition and fear. Yet Marcus's optimism was infectious, and Elliot found himself clinging to it, especially when they faced Tom. His father's health was deteriorating. Chemo left him weak, his coughs rattling the house, but his stubbornness held firm. Every conversation was a minefield. When Elliot tried to share stories of his life, Tom would change the subject or leave the room. Marcus, however, kept pushing, gently but relentlessly, sharing bits of their World of Pride parade they'd attended, a mural Elliot had painted for a community center. Tom listened, sometimes, but his silence spoke louder than words. One afternoon, while Tom napped, Elliot and Marcus decided to explore the town's library, a squat brick building with creaky floors and a musty smell. They were browsing the stacks when a librarian, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, approached them. "You're Tom Harper's boy, aren't you?" she asked Elliot, her voice warm but cautious. Elliot nodded, bracing for judgment, but the woman, Mrs. Callahan, she introduced herself, smiled. "I saw your art in the Chicago Tribune last year. Beautiful work. You've got a gift." Her words caught Elliot off guard, a rare moment of acceptance in a town that felt like a cage. She didn't mention Marcus, but her gaze lingered on their joined hands, and there was no disapproval in her eyes. Encouraged, Marcus struck up a conversation, asking about the library's community programs. Mrs. Callahan mentioned a youth art workshop, struggling due to lack of funding. "We could help," Marcus offered, his enthusiasm sparking. Elliot could teach a class, maybe show the kids how to express themselves through art. Elliot hesitated, wasn't sure Willow Creek was ready for him, but Marcus's confidence was a lifeline. They left the library with a plan to return the next week, armed with paintbrushes and hope. The workshop was a gamble. On the day of the event, a dozen kids showed up, ranging from shy 10-year-olds to skeptical teens. Elliot stood at the front of the room, his palms sweaty, as Marcus handed out supplies. The kids were curious but guarded, their questions laced with the town's prejudices. "Are you guys, like, together?" one boy asked, his tone more curious than cruel. Elliot froze, but Marcus answered with a grin. "Yeah, we are. And we're here to make some cool art with you." The room went quiet. Then slowly, the kids started painting. One girl, Mia, a 15-year-old with a streak of purple in her hair, lingered after the workshop. "My brother's gay," she whispered to Elliot, her eyes darting to the door. "He's scared to tell anyone here. But seeing you, it gives him hope." Her words hit Elliot like a wave, washing away some of his doubt. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe they were making a difference. But not everyone was moved. That evening, as they left the library, a group of men waited outside, the same flannel-clad group from the diner. Their leader, a hulking figure named Dale, stepped forward, his voice low and menacing. "You're stirring up trouble," he said, his eyes locked on Marcus. "This ain't Chicago. We don't need your kind here." Elliot's heart raced, but Marcus stood tall. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice steady. "We're just living our lives." Dale sneered, taking a step closer, but a passerby, an older man with a cane, intervened, calling out to Dale to back off. The group dispersed, but the encounter left Elliot shaken. "This is why I left," he told Marcus later, his voice trembling. "It's never going to change." Marcus pulled him close. "It's already changing. Oh, you heard Mia. You saw Mrs. Callahan. We're not alone." The next day, they returned to Tom's house, where the air felt heavier than ever. Tom had overheard their conversation about the workshop, and his disapproval was palpable. "You're making a scene," he growled, his hands trembling as he gripped his coffee mug. "You're embarrassing me." Elliot's temper flared. "Embarrassing you? Dad, I'm trying to help you. I came back for you, even after everything you've said, everything you've done." His voice cracked, years of pain spilling out. "I'm your son. Why can't you just love me?" Tom's face softened for a moment, but he looked away, unable to meet Elliot's eyes. Marcus stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Harper, we're not here to fight. But Elliot deserves better. And deep down, I think you know that." The silence that followed was deafening. Tom didn't respond, but he didn't argue either. It was a small crack in his armor, and for Elliot, it was enough to keep going. The weeks in Willow Creek stretched into a delicate dance of hope and hostility. Elliot and Marcus continued the art workshops, drawing more kids each time, their laughter and creativity a stark contrast to the town's rigid norms. Mia became a regular, her paintings bold and unapologetic. Much like Marcus, she brought her brother, Liam, a quiet 17-year-old who watched from the sidelines, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and admiration. Elliot saw himself in Liam the same guarded hope, the same fear of rejection. He made a point to talk to him, offering quiet encouragement, hoping to give him the courage Elliot had lacked at that age. But the workshops also drew attention. Rumors spread, and soon, a group of parents confronted Mrs. Callahan, demanding the classes be shut down. "They're pushing an agenda," one mother said, her voice shrill as she stood in the library's meeting room. Elliot and Marcus were there, their presence a lightning rod. Mrs. Callahan held her ground, her voice steady. "These boys are teaching art, not politics. If you don't like it, don't send your kids." The parents left, grumbling, but the victory felt hollow. The town's resistance was a constant weight, pressing harder each day. At Tom's house, the tension was a living thing. His health worsened, his coughing fits more frequent, but he refused to soften. One evening, as Elliot helped him with his medication, Tom snapped, "Why are you even here? You don't belong in this town." The words cut deep, but Elliot didn't back down. "I'm here because you're my dad," he said, his voice raw. And I'm not giving up on you, even if you've given up on me. Marcus, as always, was the anchor. He spent evenings talking to Tom about neutral things: baseball, the weather, the old cars Tom used to fix. Slowly, Tom started to open up, sharing stories of his youth, his dreams of racing cars before life ground him down. Marcus listened, his warmth disarming Tom's defenses. One night, Tom even laughed at a rare, rusty sound when Marcus recounted a disastrous attempt at fixing a friend's car. Elliot watched, torn between hope and disbelief. Was his father changing? Or was this just a fleeting moment? The town, however, was less forgiving. Dale and his crew escalated their harassment, slashing the tires of Elliot and Marcus's rental car one night. The police, when called, were dismissive, chalking it up to kids playing pranks. Elliot's anger boiled over, but Marcus kept him grounded. "They want us to leave," he said. "But we're not going anywhere." Their defiance took a new form when Marcus proposed a community art show to display the kids' work. Mrs. Callahan loved the idea, and the library offered its lawn for the event. Elliot was skeptical. Willow Creek wasn't exactly an art hub, but Marcus's vision was contagious. They spent days helping the kids prepare, their paintings a vibrant mix of dreams and struggles. Mia's piece, a bold abstract of two figures holding hands under a rainbow, stood out, a quiet rebellion against the town's prejudices. The day of the art show dawned bright and warm, a rare break from the autumn chill. The library lawn buzzed with activity as families arrived, some curious, others hostile. Dale and his group lingered at the edge, their presence a dark cloud. Elliot's nerves were frayed, but Marcus was in his element, greeting everyone with a smile, guiding kids to their displays. Liam, for the first time, spoke up, explaining his painting a lone figure under a starry sky to a small crowd. His voice shook, but he didn't stop, and Elliot felt a surge of pride. Then, trouble struck. Dale approached Mia's painting, his face twisted with disgust. "This is filth," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. He reached for the canvas, but Mia stepped in front, her eyes blazing. "It's my art," she said, her voice steady. "And it's staying." The crowd went silent, the air charged with tension. Elliot moved to intervene, but Marcus was faster, placing himself between Dale and Mia. "Back off," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "This is a kids' art show, not your personal battleground." Dale hesitated, then backed away, muttering under his breath. The crowd murmured, some in approval, others in anger, but the moment passed without violence. That night, Elliot and Marcus sat on the motel's balcony, the stars bright above Willow Creek. "You were amazing today," Elliot said, his voice soft. Marcus smiled, but his eyes were tired. "I'm just trying to keep up with you," he said. "You're the one giving these kids hope." Elliot leaned against him, the weight of the day lifting slightly. "I don't know if we're changing anything," he admitted, "but I'm starting to believe we can." Back at Tom's house the next day, something shifted. Tom asked about the art show, his tone gruff but curious. Elliot showed him photos on his phone, pausing on Mia's painting. Tom stared at it for a long time, then said, "She's got guts." It wasn't approval, not yet, but it was more than Elliot had ever expected. The art show marked a turning point, but Willow Creek's heart was slow to thaw. Elliot and Marcus doubled down on their efforts, hosting more workshops, each one drawing a larger crowd. The kids became their allies, their art a quiet revolution against the town's rigid norms. Liam started opening up, sharing his fears about coming out to his parents. And Elliot found himself becoming a mentor, offering the support he'd never had. Mia, meanwhile, grew bolder, her paintings a defiant celebration of identity. But the town's resistance grew too, a shadow that followed them everywhere. Dale's harassment escalated. One night, as Elliot and Marcus left the library, they found their car spray-painted with slurs, the windows smashed. The police, again, did little, their shrugs a silent endorsement of the town's bigotry. Elliot's hope began to fray, but Marcus refused to break. "They're scared," he said, his voice fierce as they cleaned the car. "Scared of change. Scared of us. That means we're getting somewhere." Tom's house. The air was a mix of progress and pain. Tom's health was declining rapidly, his breathing labored, his strength fading. Yet he started asking questions, small ones at first, about Elliot's art, Marcus's work in Chicago. One evening, as they sat together, Tom pulled out an old photo album, his pages yellowed with age. He pointed to a picture of Elliot as a boy, painting in the backyard. "You were always different," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "I didn't know how to handle it." Elliot's throat tightened. "You didn't try," he said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "You pushed me away." Tom looked down, his hands shaking. "I was wrong," he whispered, so quiet Elliot almost missed it. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was a crack in the wall between them. Marcus squeezed Elliot's hand under the table, a silent reminder to keep going. The town's tension reached a boiling point when Mrs. Callahan announced a second art show, this one bigger, to be held at the town square. The news sparked outrage among Dale's group, who circulated a petition to cancel it, calling it a danger to our values. But others pushed back, parents of the workshop kids, Mrs. Callahan, even the old man with the cane who'd intervened before. The petition failed, and the show went forward, a beacon of defiance. The day of the second art show was electric with anticipation. The town square was transformed, lined with colorful canvases and buzzing with people. Elliot and Marcus worked tirelessly, helping the kids set up, their nerves masked by smiles. Liam's painting, a vibrant depiction of two hands clasped under a sky of stars, drew a crowd, its message unmistakable. Mia's new piece, a mural of diverse faces united by a rainbow, stood at the center, a bold challenge to the town's prejudice. As the event began, Dale and his crew arrived, their presence a storm cloud. They didn't act, but their glares were a warning. Elliot's heart pounded, but Marcus kept him grounded, his hand a steady anchor. Then, something unexpected happened. A woman from the diner, who'd once stared at them with disdain, approached Mia's mural, her eyes soft. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't understand before, but I'm trying." Her words rippled through the crowd, a small but seismic shift. The show was a success, but the victory was short-lived. That night, someone set fire to the library's lawn, destroying several of the kids' paintings. The fire was small, quickly contained, but the message was clear. Elliot felt sick, the weight of the town's hate crushing him. Marcus, though, was unbreakable. "They're lashing out because they're losing," he said, his eyes fierce. "We're not stopping." The next day, they returned to the library, helping Mrs. Callahan clean up the damage. The kids showed up too, their faces set with determination. Liam, usually so quiet, spoke up. "I'm telling my parents tonight," he said, his voice steady. "I'm tired of hiding." Elliot hugged him, tears in his eyes, knowing how much courage it took. Back at Tom's house, the mood was somber. Tom had heard about the fire, and for the first time, he seemed angry not at Elliot or Marcus, but at the town. "This ain't right," he said, his voice weak but firm. "You're just trying to help those kids." It was the closest he'd come to supporting them, and Elliot clung to it, a lifeline in the storm. That evening, Tom asked to see Elliot's sketchbook, the one he carried everywhere. Elliot hesitated, then handed it over, his heart racing. The pages were filled with drawings of Marcus, of their life in Chicago, of love in all its raw beauty. Tom flipped through them slowly, his expression unreadable. When he reached a sketch of himself, younger and stronger, his eyes glistened. "You're good, kid," he said, his voice breaking. "Real good." Elliot couldn't speak. For the first time in years, he felt seen. The fire at the library was a wound, but it galvanized Willow Creek in ways Elliot never expected. The kids, led by Mia and Liam, organized a cleanup effort, their resilience a quiet rebellion. The town began to fracture not between hate and acceptance, but between those who clung to fear and those who dared to hope. Mrs. Callahan rallied the community, securing donations to repair the damage, and the art workshops resumed, stronger than ever. Liam came out to his parents, a tearful but triumphant moment, and they surprised him with hesitant support, a crack in the town's armor. Elliot and Marcus felt the shift, but the weight of their time in Willow Creek was heavy. Tom's health was fading fast, his days now spent in bed, his breathing a labored rasp. Elliot stayed by his side, reading to him, sharing stories of his life in Chicago. Marcus joined them, his presence a bridge between father and son. One afternoon, Tom reached for Elliot's hand, his grip weak but deliberate. "I was wrong about a lot," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm proud of you, son." The words broke Elliot, years of pain dissolving in a flood of tears. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was enough. The town's transformation wasn't complete, but it was real. The woman from the diner, whose name was Clara, started attending the workshops, bringing her daughter to paint. The old man with the cane, Mr. Reynolds, wrote a letter to the local paper, praising the art show and calling for change. Even Dale's group quieted, their influence waning as the town saw the kids' courage, the beauty in their art, the love in Elliot and Marcus's defiance. As Tom's condition worsened, Elliot and Marcus prepared to leave Willow Creek. The night before their flight, they sat with Tom, the room filled with a fragile peace. Tom handed Elliot a small box, his hands trembling. Inside was a keychain, a tiny wrench, a relic from Tom's days as a mechanic. "Keep it," he said, And don't forget me. Elliot clutched it, promising he never would. The return flight to Chicago was a mirror of their arrival. But everything had changed. They boarded the same plane, but this time, no one forced them to the last row. They sat together, hands clasped, unafraid. The flight attendant from before, a woman named Sarah, approached them mid-flight, her expression sheepish. "I was wrong," she said, her voice low. "What I did, it wasn't right." Elliot nodded, forgiving her silently, while Marcus offered a warm smile. "Thank you," he said, his grace a quiet power. As the plane began its descent, a passenger, a young woman with a sketchbook, stood and walked to their row. "I saw your story online," she said, her eyes bright. "The art show, the kids, you're incredible." She held up her sketchbook, showing a drawing of two men holding hands, inspired by them. Before Elliot could respond, another passenger stood, then another, clapping softly at first, then louder. The cabin filled with applause, a wave of support that drowned out the memory of their first flight. Elliot's eyes filled with tears, his hand tight in Marcus's. "We did it," he whispered, his voice trembling with awe. Marcus kissed his forehead, his own eyes glistening. "No. You did it." When they landed, the entire plane was on its feet, a standing ovation for two men who'd faced hate and chosen love. They stepped off the plane, the keychain in Elliot's pocket a reminder of his father, the applause a testament to their courage. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was changing, one heart at a time. And Elliot knew, as he walked hand in hand with Marcus, that they'd left something behind, a spark of hope, a legacy of love. Back in Chicago, they returned to their life, their apartment filled with new sketches, new dreams. Elliot painted a mural for the community center, inspired by Willow Creek's vibrant tapestry of hands, hearts, and rainbows, with a tiny wrench at its center. Marcus framed a photo from the art show, Mia and Liam smiling beside their paintings, a reminder of what they'd fought for. Months later, they received a letter from Mrs. Callahan. Tom had passed, but his final days were peaceful, filled with stories of Elliot's childhood. The library had named a room after him, the Elliot Harper Art Studio, a space for kids to create without fear. Mia and Liam were leading workshops now, their courage a beacon for others. Elliot and Marcus stood together, reading the letter, their hands entwined. They'd faced a town's hate, a father's rejection, a plane's judgment, and emerged stronger. Their love wasn't just a rebellion, it was a revolution, one that would ripple through Willow Creek and beyond, proving that even in the last row, love could rise.